Caleb Monroe was 37 years old the night he drove home from his second job, a 12-hour overnight freight coordination shift, still wearing the same clothes he'd put on 22 hours before, and found a certified letter from a family law attorney wedged between the storm door and the frame. He had been working 2 jobs for 11 months. The first was his primary position as a senior logistics coordinator at a distribution center in Nashville, a job he was good at and had held for 6 years. The second was a nighttime routing dispatcher role he had picked up the week after Dara's diagnosis. 3 shifts a week, 9 at night until 5 in the morning, because the surgery she needed, a spinal procedure that 3 different specialists had told them was not optional, carried an out-of-pocket cost of $41,000 after insurance. And Caleb Monroe was not the kind of man who told his wife that money was the reason she had to wait. Her friends called him Blue-Collar Caleb. Said it with a certain affection that contained, just underneath it, a certain condescension. They were women who lunched and networked and kept their nails done, and Dara had drifted toward them in the 3rd year of the marriage, the way water drifts toward whatever channel opens beneath it. Caleb had driven her to every pre-op appointment. He had held her hand in the recovery room. He had changed the dressing on the surgical site for 6 weeks while working both jobs, setting an alarm for 5:30 in the morning to be home before she woke. She had been recovering for 4 months and 2 weeks when she had filed that letter. What the attorney and Dara and her careful new network did not know was that Caleb Monroe had not worked freight coordination and overnight dispatch, because those were the only options available to him. What happened in the weeks that followed cost Dara Montgomery Monroe considerably more than $41,000. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:15, and Caleb was already awake. He had not slept well in a long time. Not since the dispatch shifts started, not since the medical debt began its slow, organized retreat from the joint savings account, not since the specific quality of silence in the house had changed from peaceful to withheld. He lay in the dark for a moment in the way he had trained himself to do. Inventory first, movement second, then got up and started the coffee. The kitchen in their house in East Nashville was the room he had spent the most time in over the past year. Not cooking, though he could, but moving through it at odd hours, assembling the logistics of a life he was maintaining, mostly alone. A paper coffee cup from the second job on the counter, his work boots by the side door, a calendar on the wall with his shifts marked in blue pen, Dara's medical appointments in black, and nothing written in for the evening she spent out, which had been most of them since she'd come off the prescription pain management in month 2. On the counter, propped against the toaster where he couldn't miss it, was his mother's recipe card for sweet potato pie. Not the original. That one was in a fireproof box in the bedroom closet alongside his service documents and his certifications, but a photocopy his Aunt Bernice had made for him the year he got married. His mother, Elaine Monroe, had died of a stroke the winter before the wedding. She had never met Dara. Caleb sometimes thought about what she would have seen, the way she always saw things before he did, the way she would have watched and said nothing for exactly as long as she needed to, and then said one precise thing that named the whole situation. His mother used to tell him, "Caleb, the people who need you most will never tell you what they're planning. Watch what they do, not what they say." He had been watching. He just hadn't let himself name it yet. He was a logistics coordinator by trade and by temperament. A man who understood that any system's reliability depended on what you planned for before the failure, not after. He had applied that same understanding to most of the important decisions of his adult life. His service contract, his certifications, the quiet diversification of assets he had begun in his late 20s on the advice of a financial advisor named Bernard, who had once told him, without ceremony, that the best financial move a man could make was to own things that didn't require him to explain them to anyone. He poured his coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard. He had built the raised garden beds out there the spring before the surgery, treated cedar, 3 beds running parallel to the fence, which he'd also repaired board by board that same spring. Dara had been interested in the garden for approximately 2 weeks before other things absorbed her attention. He tended it himself. The tomatoes were finished for the season now, the beds turned over, covered with a layer of straw he'd put down on a Sunday afternoon in October while she was at a friend's place in Green Hills. He had been home from the overnight shift for 40 minutes when he heard her moving upstairs. He refilled his coffee and waited. She came down in the specific way she had come down for about 3 months now, already dressed, already composed, already in the next thing, and she kissed his cheek and said good morning and asked if there was coffee. And he said yes, and poured her a cup, and she stood at the island checking her phone with her back to him. He noticed, not for the first time, the phone angle, screen tilted away from him, body angled slightly. He had been noticing it since August. It was now November. He had been patient because he was that kind of man. Because patience was not weakness, it was intelligence applied to a timeline. 3 days later, the certified letter arrived, and the patience gave way to something steadier and colder and more useful. He didn't open the letter right away. He sat in his car in the driveway for 6 minutes with the envelope on the passenger seat, the engine running, the heat on. He was running on 4 hours of sleep and the particular hollowness that comes from sustained exertion with no recovery built in. He thought about his mother's voice. Watch what they do, not what they say. He thought about the garden beds in the back. He thought about the $41,000 he had paid in installments over 9 months, a number so specific he could feel its weight like a physical thing. Then he picked up the envelope and opened it. The letter was from a firm called Whitmore and Associates. It was a petition for divorce filed in Davidson County 2 days prior. The petition cited irreconcilable differences. It requested an equitable division of marital assets. It made a preliminary claim for rehabilitative spousal support. It included, as an attachment, a financial disclosure document that listed the marital estate with a specificity that told Caleb immediately that someone had spent time preparing this, that the numbers and account balances were too precise, too organized, for Dara to have assembled them alone in recent days. She had been building this for a while. He read the financial disclosure a second time. His hands didn't shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He was a logistics man. He read documents the way he read routing manifests, looking for what was listed, and then looking for what wasn't. What wasn't listed was the Webb Monroe Holdings account. Not because it was hidden, it was a legitimate registered account in his name, the same account Bernard had helped him structure 11 years ago. But because Dara didn't know it existed, had never known. He had disclosed it fully in the prenuptial agreement they had both signed before the wedding, in a clause that was plainly worded and clearly formatted, and which he was certain she had not read with any care. He photographed every page of the petition with his personal phone. He photographed the financial disclosure, page by page. He forwarded everything to the secure email address he maintained through his business certifications account, which was registered to a domain she had no access to. He got out of the car and went inside. He did not say anything to Dara. She was upstairs. He set the envelope on the counter, still open, in exactly the spot where she would have left it for him to find. Then he went to his laptop and spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents he had not looked at in some time. Account statements, the prenuptial agreement itself, the property deed, his certifications, The terms of a disability insurance policy he'd carried for 9 years that she had asked about once, early in the marriage, and not asked about since. He found, in the joint savings account records, a pattern he had not noticed because he had not been looking for it. Between the 3rd and 9th month of her recovery, 11 transfers had been made from the joint account to an account he did not recognize, in amounts between $400 and $1,100, always on a day when he was on the overnight shift. The total was $9,200. He pulled up the county property records and searched the address of the account holder. It was a rental property on the east side of Charlotte, a city where Dara had a college roommate named Vivienne, a woman she had mentioned visiting twice in the past year. He searched Vivienne Marsh in the county records. The rental property had been purchased 7 months ago for $212,000, with a down payment of $28,500 made by wire transfer. He noted the date of the purchase. He cross-referenced it with his own account statements. He sat back from the laptop. He was very still for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Bernard. "I need the full picture on the prenup," he said. "And I need the name of a family attorney, someone who reads financial documents the way you do." Bernard was quiet for only a second. "I'll send you 2 names inside the hour." Caleb closed the laptop and went to change out of his work clothes. He had a full shift in 6 hours. There was plenty of time. Real preparation happened before the storm, not inside it. The attorney Bernard referred him to was a woman named Rochelle Tate, 58, a partner at a firm that specialized in high-asset family law and financial forensics. She had the steady, unhurried manner of someone who had seen every variation of this story and was not surprised by any of them. Her office was in the Gulch, clean-lined and uncluttered, and she reviewed his documents while he sat across from her with his coffee and said nothing. After 22 minutes, she set down the last page and looked at him. "Your prenuptial agreement is airtight," she said. "The Webb Monroe Holdings account is excluded from the marital estate explicitly, with a signed acknowledgement on page 7. Her signature. Notarized." She paused. "The account she doesn't know about. What's it currently worth?" He told her. She didn't react the way most people reacted. She simply wrote the number on her notepad and underlined it once. She asked for rehabilitative spousal support on the basis of impaired earning capacity following her medical procedure. She looked at him. "Which you paid for, fully, $41,060 across 9 months. Do you have documentation of every payment? Bank statements, the hospital's itemized billing records, the insurance EOBs, and a letter from the practice manager confirming the account balance is 0. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was close to one. "The $9,000 transfer pattern to the Charlotte account, I want a forensic accountant to trace that. If any of those transfers were made from joint funds after the date she retained Whitmore, that's dissipation of marital assets. That changes what I can ask for in the counterclaim." She told him to stop doing 2 things immediately: making any deposits into the joint account above the minimum needed to cover shared household utilities, and discussing the case with anyone connected to Dara or her social network. She told him to change the password on any financial account that used a shared email as a recovery address. She gave him one more instruction: keep going to work. Both jobs. Same schedule. Don't change anything visible. He nodded. He understood the logic. You didn't alter the routing until you were ready to reroute everything at once. He stopped that same afternoon at his Aunt Bernice's house in Antioch. Bernice Washington was 61, a retired school administrator. The woman who had raised Caleb alongside his mother after his father left when he was 4, who had attended his high school graduation and his commissioning ceremony and his wedding, who had watched Dara with the same patient attentiveness she applied to everything important in life, and had said, 7 months into the marriage, in the kitchen over coffee, one quiet sentence that he had not forgotten. "That woman loves what you provide, Caleb. Make sure you know the difference between that and loving you." He had thought about that sentence many times since. He thought about it now. He sat at Bernice's kitchen table and told her what he'd found: the transfers, the Charlotte property, Vivienne Marsh, the timing of the filing. Bernice listened without speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Her mother called me." "Did you know that?" He did not know that. "Called me in September. Said Dara had mentioned to her that she and you were having trouble. Said she was worried." Bernice wrapped both hands around her mug. I asked her what kind of trouble. She said she didn't know the details. But she said Dara had started talking to Vivienne's husband, a man named Troy, at the end of the summer. Said Vivienne and Troy had been having difficulties of their own. She looked at Caleb steadily. "Troy Marsh is a contractor. He does commercial renovation work. He was hired to do a job in Charlotte, a renovation on a building on the east side of the city." Caleb thought about the rental property, the purchase date, the down payment amount cross-referenced against the joint account transfers. "Does Dara's mother know you know any of this?" he asked. "No, she called me because she was worried about you. She said you were working yourself to nothing and nobody was saying thank you." Bernice set down her mug. Her mother is a decent woman. Whatever Dara became, she didn't learn it at home. He drove back through Nashville in the early dark, and he thought about systems. About how a failure in one load path always redistributed force somewhere else, and how the secondary failures were almost always more revealing than the original. Dara had not been planning a divorce. She had been planning a transfer of his resources to her next arrangement, and the divorce was just the mechanism. Troy Marsh was the destination. The Charlotte property was the staging ground. The $9,000 movement of joint funds was the first freight consignment in a routing plan she believed was invisible. She had no idea he had built his entire professional life around finding exactly this kind of invisible routing plan. He called Rochelle that evening and gave her Troy Marsh's name. Some deliveries, he thought, arrived at unexpected addresses. The mediation was held on a Tuesday morning in late January, in a neutral conference facility in Midtown. Beige walls, a long table, 2 separate waiting areas so the parties didn't have to see each other before the session. Dara arrived with her attorney from Whitmore & Associates, a sharp man named Garrett, who wore a confident expression and a watch that cost more than Caleb's first car. They had reviewed the initial financial disclosures. They believed they knew what they were walking into. They did not know what they were walking into. Caleb arrived with Rochelle. Also present, seated along one wall, Bernard, his financial advisor, with a summary document in a slim folder. And a forensic accountant from the firm Rochelle had retained, a man named Dr. Calloway, with a larger folder and a reading glasses case on the table in front of him. Garrett opened by reiterating the petition's claims: irreconcilable differences, equitable asset division, rehabilitative support. He referenced the joint account, the shared property, Dara's reduced professional activity during her post-surgical recovery period, her anticipated earnings trajectory. Rochelle waited until he finished. Then she opened her folder. She walked through the prenuptial agreement first. Page 7. The Webb Monroe Holdings exclusion. Dara's signature, notarized, dated the account's current valuation, stated plainly. Dara's expression did not change visibly, but something moved behind her eyes, a recalculation happening fast and quiet. Dr. Calloway spoke next. He laid out the $9,200 transfer pattern from the joint account, the timing relative to the filing date with Whitmore and Associates. 4 of the 11 transfers had been made after Dara had retained her attorney, which placed them squarely within the legal definition of marital asset dissipation under Tennessee statute. He laid out the Charlotte rental property records, the purchase timeline, the down payment amount, and the name of the co-purchaser, Troy Marsh. Garrett said, "I'd like a moment." The down payment, Rochelle said, represents funds traceable to the joint account through a series of transfers made over 6 months, with 3 of those transfers confirmed after the date Ms. Monroe Montgomery retained your firm. She looked at Dara. That is, legally, not her money to move. Dara said something to Garrett in a low voice. Garrett put his hand on the table, a small, steadying gesture. Bernard spoke last briefly. He documented the full scope of the Webb Monroe Holdings account. He documented the $41,000 in surgical payments, each installment, each date, each confirmation number. He placed the total paid for Dara's medical care against the total she had moved from joint funds in the same period. The numbers sat next to each other on the summary sheet with the quiet authority of mathematics. Dara looked across the table at Caleb. She started to say his name. "You asked for rehabilitative support," Caleb said. His voice was level, on the basis that the marriage left you with reduced capacity. "I want you to think about what you just heard from Dr. Calloway and Bernard, and then explain to me, and to this room, what you think rehabilitation should cost someone who moved joint funds to purchase property with another man while her husband was working overnight shifts to pay for her surgery." The room was very quiet. Garrett said something about procedural matters. Rochelle dealt with it efficiently. Dara did not speak again for the remainder of the session. The counterclaim Rochelle filed that afternoon sought full recovery of the dissipated joint funds, legal fees, and a judgment for fraudulent misrepresentation in the financial disclosure. The rehabilitative support petition was withdrawn by Whitmore and Associates before the week was out. Caleb drove home alone that afternoon on the same stretch of highway he had driven every night for 11 months to get to and from the dispatch job. And he thought about nothing in particular. The roads were clear. The city moved around him the way cities do, indifferently, continuously, without waiting for anyone to process anything. He had done what he came to do. The rest was paperwork. He was not bitter. He was finished. Those were different things. 8 months had passed, easy and steady, the way good months do. Caleb was in the backyard of the house in East Nashville on a Saturday morning, turning the soil in the raised beds and working in a layer of compost he'd been building since October. The cedar boards were weathering well. He'd treated them again in the spring. Same product, same method, and the first of the season's seedlings were on the kitchen windowsill, waiting for the last frost to clear. Tomatoes, 2 kinds of peppers, a row of basil he'd planted optimistically and would probably coddle past all reason. A woman named Joy was inside making coffee. She was a physical therapist who worked at a clinic near Vanderbilt, a person with a direct and unhurried way of speaking, who had met Caleb at Bernice's church in the spring and had, after 2 months of Sunday conversations, asked him if he wanted to get dinner, which he had appreciated both for its simplicity and for the complete absence of performance in how she said it. She asked good questions, and she did not fill silences, because she thought silence needed filling. He had not told her very much yet. He did not need to. There was time. The divorce had been finalized in April. The dissipation claim had recovered $7,400 of the $9,200, the balance untraceable once Troy Marsh had moved certain accounts. The counterclaim judgment for legal fees and misrepresentation had added another $18,600 to the recovery. Dara had settled, rather than proceed to litigation once the full scope of Dr. Calloway's forensic report became clear to Whitmore and Associates. Troy Marsh's renovation company had, according to a brief mention in a Nashville area business newsletter that Bernice had sent him a screenshot of, closed its commercial operations in the fall. Troy had relocated to Charlotte permanently. Dara had moved into the Charlotte rental property as a tenant, not an owner, which told its own story about how that particular arrangement had sorted itself out. Her mother had called Caleb twice since the finalization. He had taken both calls. She was a decent woman, as Bernice had said, and she was grieving in her own way the distance that had opened between her and her daughter. And Caleb was not a man who punished the innocent for the decisions of the guilty. He kept the calls brief and kind and wished her well. The dispatch job had ended in May. He'd given his notice with 2 weeks lead time and a handwritten thank you to the woman who'd hired him, a gruff and fair-minded supervisor named Loretta, who had never once asked why a senior logistics coordinator was working overnight dispatch and had simply scheduled him and paid him and shaken his hand on the last night. He had slept 8 hours straight for the first time in nearly a year on the morning after his last shift. He had not set an alarm. The Webb Monroe Holdings account had grown by a figure he didn't discuss in ordinary conversation. Bernard had called it a favorable period. Caleb called it patience paying its dividend. Joy came through the back door with 2 mugs and handed him one without comment, and stood beside him looking at the beds. She said, "You're talking to those seedlings." "Encouraging them," he said. Is that what that was? He turned the last row of soil and set down the trowel and straightened up. The morning was coming in clean and bright, the kind of early spring morning that felt like a statement of intent. He stood with his coffee and let the quiet settle around him the way it always did now. Not empty, not withheld, just present, just his. He thought about his mother's recipe card on the counter inside. He thought about 11 months of overnight shifts and the specific weight of $41,000 paid, installment by installment, for a woman who had been simultaneously building the exit. He thought about Bernice's kitchen and Rochelle's notepad and the sound of Garrett's confident watch on the conference table before the session began. He did not feel what people expected him to feel. He felt, instead, the particular satisfaction of a man who had done the work correctly and built something that was going to last. He was whole. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.